Well, one theory, of course, when we see these disparities in interracial crime, one theory, of course, is that, and this would stand for, say, vehicle theft. One theory is that blacks will target whites for theft or for mugging because they expect whites to have more money or whites own nice cars. In the case of vehicle theft, that might be the case. However, when it comes to burglary is one of those crimes in which the racial disproportions are very, very small. That is to say that a black person is only 10 times more likely to burgle a white man's house than the other way around. I mean, 10 times is pretty high. But why? I mean, if the motivation is pecuniary, if what they're looking for is money, you think they'd be burgling all these rich men's houses, they're much more likely to steal a white man's car. 10 times more likely. So you run into very curious, interesting things when you look into this. But if we restrict ourselves to violent crime, and this is something that I think is well worth bearing in mind, something that the media will never explain to you. When blacks select a victim for a violent crime, be it aggravated assault, rape, murder, they are slightly more likely to pick a white person as their victim than a black person. Which is to say, there is slightly more black on white crime than black on black crime. There was a time when Jesse Jackson and all his pals were ranting and raving about how black people were victimizing each other. The fact is, slightly more often than that, they're victimizing whites. But there was certainly never any organization to try to stop that. Finally, another big myth is that, okay, well, maybe it's the case that black people commit more of these street-type crimes than white people, but white people are committing all this even much more dangerous white-collar crime, and so whites are really just as crime-prone, but we don't hear about it. Well, once again, wrong. When if you look at the arrest, incarceration, reported statistics, blacks are about 4 times more likely to commit fraud, about 6 times more likely to commit embezzlement, and 3 times more likely to be charged for racketeering. Those are all white-collar crimes. As I say, it is a rare crime that you find in which blacks are not right at the top of the heap in terms of frequency. Now, I'll close with the dry statistical part of my talk here by pointing out that there may be a change in how Asians are behaving in terms of crime, given this statistic. There's been a lot of talk, of course, these days about youth gangs, violent gangs, particularly among Hispanics. Well, there's good reason to complain about Hispanic gangs, because Hispanics between the age of 12 and 24 are no less than 18 times more likely than whites to be members of a criminal gang. Blacks, in the case of blacks, it's about 14 times. Asians come in number 1. Hispanics are number 1. They are more likely to be in criminal gangs than blacks. And Asians, they are no slouch either. Asians are about 9 times more likely than whites to be in criminal gangs. So it may be that as these young 12 to 24 types mature, we could find something of a change in the crime rate of Asians, which, as I say years before, have consistently been lower than those of whites. Now, statisticians talk about something called a correlation. And a correlation is simply the extent to which one variable affects another variable. Just to put it in concrete terms, in terms of crime. It turns out that if you want to know something about the crime rate of an area, and all you can find out is one thing, what is the one thing that you need to know to find out if an area is going to be high crime? Well, you guessed it. All you really need to know is the demographic makeup. All you need to know is the number. In fact, the best number to know is what the total number of blacks and Hispanics combined is. There's a correlation. Those of you who are familiar with correlations will understand this and appreciate it, but there's a correlation about 0.8 between the density of blacks and Hispanics and the crime rate. Now, I'm sorry, this is violent crime rate we're speaking about here. Now, the lefty loonies will always say, no, race has got nothing to do with it. This has to do with poverty, and this has to do with high school dropouts. Well, it's true. There is something of a correlation between poverty. If an area is poor, it is more likely to have a high crime rate than an area that is rich. But the correlation between poverty and crime is only about 1/3 as good as the correlation between race and crime. Likewise, the correlation for having been a high school dropout, for example. Yes, it is true. In those areas where you have lots of high school dropouts, you do have more crime. But once again, the correlation there is much weaker. Only at about a 0.3 level, 0.25, 0.3 level. So, yes, indeed, if you're going to have a chance to know one thing about an area that is going to give you an idea what the crime rate, it's the race of the people who live there. Now, let me speak just a little bit about the death penalty. I'm sure that you've heard, all of you, over and over again, this horrible fact in the United States that because we are a racist society that values the lives of white people more than we value the lives of black people, murderers of white people are more likely to go to jail than murderers of black people. I'm sorry, go get the death penalty, I beg your pardon. That if you kill a black person, America doesn't care and you don't get the death penalty. But kill a white person, oh boy, we're going to put this guy to death. Well, that is in fact true. There's a slightly more likelihood for the killers of whites to get the death penalty than the killers of blacks. But let's think about this for a moment. If this were a seethingly anti-black society and every judge and juror was sitting there thinking, rubbing his hands saying, how can I get this black person? Who is the black person that's on their minds? Not the person who is dead. It's the person who is sitting in front of them every day in the courtroom. If we had a system that was absolutely stacked against blacks, sending them to the gas or the firing squad or whatever the power of the state's doing in the electric chair more diligently than whites, it would be the defendants. That's the person who's in the courthouse every single day. You see that person's race. The person who is dead, the race of that person does not come up in a trial at all ordinarily. It's in fact perfectly possible that the jury may not even know the race of the person who is killed. That person's not in the courtroom. If you're thinking about race, you're not thinking about this absent person. It's not as though the prosecutor, in his summation, says to the jury, now, ladies and gentlemen, while you're deliberating on whether to give the death penalty, don't forget, the victim was a white man. Don't forget it. No, this is not happening. If there was some kind of racial consideration that was going to be to the detriment of blacks, it would be to the detriment of black killers, not anything to do with the victim. And in fact, black murderers are considerably less likely than white murderers to get the death penalty. Now, does this reflect some sort of prejudice against whites? No, not at all. This reflects a considerable difference in the kind of killing that black people do and the kind of killing that white people do. It's really rather different. Most of the time, black people are killed by black people. Well, almost exclusively, black people are killed by black people. And most of the time, white people are killed by white people. And they do their killing in different ways. Black people very often kill each other as a result of an argument that got out of hand. And they're getting into a fight, and somebody will pull out a knife, and somebody ends up dead. It's, the usual, well, you stepped on my shoe, officer, what do you expect? White people have different and better reasons for killing each other. They don't do it nearly as often. As I said before, about maybe 1/8, 1/10 as often. But when white people kill each other, it's not because somebody stepped on their shoe. They think about it, they plan it, and then they kill that bastard. And that's first-degree murder, premeditated murder, and you're more likely to get the death penalty. That is why white people are more likely to get the death penalty because, well, they just go about it differently. It's less emotional. It's more planned ahead of time. So it's because whites kill whites that the killers of whites get the death penalty. It's because blacks generally kill blacks that black people don't get the death penalty. And yet, as I've said before, this is the kind of thing we're told over and over again. Nobody really analyzes it and explains it. Now, in closing, I'd like to get back to this question of Asians. It is true that Asians have very low crime rates. It's also true, from the best estimate, that Asians